Welcome to Missouri Corn Talk, your go-to weekly agriculture podcast delivering fast, reliable updates on market development efforts, ethanol demand, and the issues shaping today's corn industry. I'm your host, David Geiger. One of the biggest ways Missouri corn farmers build demand is not limited to only ethanol or domestic use, but also by feeding a growing appetite for high-quality protein around the world. That is where partnerships are critical. Through collaborations with organizations like the U.S. Meat Export Federation, MissouriCorn is helping promote corn-fed beef and pork to global customers, creating value that comes back to the farm. Joining us now is Senior Vice President of Industry Relations, John Hinners, to talk about that work, including the recent U.S. Red Meat Symposium in Mexico City and why markets like Mexico continue to be so important for corn growers. John, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. And that symposium, that mission to Mexico included some members of Missouri corn growers. Tell me about that and your experience there.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to visit. When you look at what the U.S. Meat Export Federation does, one of our core missions is to put a buyer and a seller together around the world. So one of those opportunities just came up here recently in Mexico City, Mexico, where we had about 30 U.S. companies who sell U.S. beef, pork, and lamb all together in a hotel setting. And what we did is it's kind of like a speed dating situation where the U.S. sellers had a chance to visit with over 150 buyers of U.S. products in the hotel room for an afternoon. And it was a great opportunity for a couple of the corn growers board of directors to also intermingle with those buyers, talk to them about the attributes of the corn-fed beef, corn-fed pork that we have here in the United States, and really to help facilitate the sale of U.S. meats as it relates to building some profitability for this industry.
Is corn a big portion of what we feed animals that go overseas or abroad?
Yes, when you look at the United States, we're quite different from other countries. You know, some countries can talk about some grain feeding and so forth. But when you look at the United States, you know, predominantly when we look at the cattle feeding sector and the pork sector, it's predominantly corn and soybeans. So that's a great attribute that we have, especially when you look at the cattle industry, the complex, how it's changed over at least over the last 15 years. You know, certainly now when you look at choice cattle and prime cattle, that makes up over 85% of our cattle right now in the carcass grade. So we have a premium product, and it had not been for the good genetics and the land grant universities, the great job that our producers do, that 85% wouldn't happen. But the big component to that is the corn feeding that we have really allows that marbling to come out on those ribeyes and so forth, and certainly sets us apart from some of our competition around the world, because corn feeding is the hierarchy. It's the top notch. It's the cream of the crop. And we're fortunate to be able to do that so well here in the United States, and even specifically Missouri.
The reason why I brought that up, and I appreciate the answer there, was because when you talk about U.S. exports and how corn is an integral part of the process, especially with something like the meat industry, it tells you the importance of trade and trade agreements. And we know something like the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement is being looked at for review this year. What does that lend to the stability of the system, and how are you all working and looking at this process as we move forward this year?
Well, I think the key thing is we have to continue to reiterate the importance of that trade situation that we have with our partners. Certainly when you look at Mexico, it's such a critical market to the pork industry. Today, when you look at pork exports to Mexico, it's an opportunity for us to send the leg and ham into Mexico. We think about the hams here in the United States. It's a product that's delicious, but for the most part, we send 48% of our legs and hams outside of the United States, and Mexico's a number one buyer of that item. In addition to that, think of the loin. You know, it's maybe one of the lesser valued, undervalued cuts on the hog. Pork loin, it's a great item. It's delicious, but certainly we found opportunities to increase our pork loin sales outside of the United States. And we've moved from roughly 10% of our pork loins going out of the United States in 2019 to last year, we were at 20% because number one, it's a great value. And number two, we've educated the trade and educated the consumers on how to cook it, how to use it, and how to make it very useful within the markets that we sell to. And i.e. number one market for pork loins is Japan, but certainly Mexico's knocking on the door and saying, hey, we'll take more of that product as well.
You mentioned education there. We started off this conversation by talking about this speed dating process between the buyers and the sellers over Mexico City. How does education and partnerships collide in how we work abroad with our organizations looking at these new markets?
Well, number one, you've got to be present. You've got to be in the market, and you've got to have the ability to talk and show the products and get out and promote it, because it's not going to just promote itself. So we've got specialized teams in many of these markets from the Meat Export Federation side of things, 20 offices around the world. We are headquartered in Denver, Colorado, a nonprofit organization. But really our key assets are the producers that make up this organization and the entities such as MissouriCorn. Certainly there's value in promoting. And when you look at just this past year, we work with Dave Juday. He's an economist that has an economic model. And when you look at just the animals that we export, beef and pork, over 508 million bushels of corn went into just those exported animals. So that's a value added opportunity for the corn industry. And thus, that's why we see support for the corn industry in this protein complex the way it is. You know, when you think about those 508 million bushels that we send outside of the United States, that can be about 13.5% of a bushel's value. And in last year, we averaged $4.29 on a bushel of corn. That was the average for the year. So 58 cents of that can be contributed to red meat exports. So I think that's a win-win for everybody involved. It's a use of our corn, and certainly it's a value add to the overall price. And it's certainly something that we can hang our hats on and smile about, because that's a producer-driven economic benefit. So I think that's a good thing. And that's why we have these organizations such as MissouriCorn out there pushing and promoting.
Through our conversation today, I've picked up a recurring theme here, a motif of something that would just boil down to the term marketing. And that involves a lot of different processes, relational, education, and partnerships. When you look at how trade teams operate and how they market our products, how they engage with real people across the world, what is that first initial thought on why it's important to do?
Well, if you're a buyer, you want to see your customer, you want to see your sales rep. It's funny that you asked that question, and it jogged my memory. I was talking with one individual, and I'm at the hotel, and my phone dings at 5:30 in the morning, and I'm like, oh goodness, what is this? What's this about? And I look down, and it's a U.S. company rep, and he was so excited he couldn't stand it. He had sold 33 loads of pork hams and some pork stomach, and that was just one day. The next day he sold 37 loads, truckloads of pork. And he wanted to share that with me, just in a positive note. He wasn't bragging by any means, but he said it wouldn't have happened had he not been at this red meat symposium. And this is even before the event started. He had gone down and seen a few customers. So just being there, having the right product, having the right price, being fair with your business really can make or break you in this business today, because it's so competitive. Things have become more equal over time. And now you've got to look at just service, the attributes that you have, the stackable attributes with your product, food safety. You've got to remind your customers all these things that we have to offer from the United States, because we'll never be the cheapest, nor do we want to be. However, we want to be the best, and we want to remain the best. So that takes time and it takes effort. And unfortunately, it takes some dollars. You've got to be there. Certainly, that was a win for this company's representative to be able to sell that amount of product. But it doesn't matter if you're selling 60 loads or 5 loads. It all helps.
John, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, as well as thank you for your work in what you're doing to build demand for U.S. corn-fed products around the world. We really appreciate having you today.
Well, thank you so much. I wish everybody a safe planting season and certainly wish the best this spring. And I hope you get some adequate moisture to carry you throughout the growing season. So thank you so much for the opportunity today.
That's all we have for this week's Missouri Corn Talk. This podcast is made possible by the Missouri Corn Merchandising Council and the Missouri Corn Growers Association. To learn more about the work being done on behalf of Missouri corn farmers, visit mocorn.org. I'm David Geiger. Thanks for listening.